¿Qué pasa a todos? Bienvenidos al canal y para mis suscriptores, bienvenidos de nuevo. Me llaman Austin en la calle, pero ustedes me pueden llamar Austin o Austin Teaches Spanish. Hoy escuchamos la canción Oye Mi Amor del grupo mexicano Maná y hablaremos de lo que podemos aprender. This group actually just came out with a new album a little while ago and they're actually on tour right now. I think they're in Spain at the moment while I'm recording this video. So I figured this would be a good time to talk about one of their most famous songs. This is an older song from 1992, but it's a really good one. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about here is that line where he says, Yo soy derecho y no te fallo. Now, two things I want to talk about here. Firstly, that word derecho. Now, that means straight, straightforward. It means direct. It means honest or upstanding in the context of talking about a person. They're direct, they're honest, they're straightforward, they're upstanding. But this isn't to be confused with the term derecha. Derecha is the direction meaning right. So we've got izquierda y derecha. Now, when we use derecha to describe a masculine noun, it becomes derecho. So if I want to say, I hurt my right foot, that would be me lastimé el pie derecho, because it's going to take on that masculine form. But when it's not being used as a masculine or feminine, it's going to be just meaning straight or direct, straightforward. Another word that we can use for this is recto, which basically means the same thing. It means straight. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is where he says no te fallo, which uses the word fallar. Now, fallar is the verb meaning to fail. So in this case, he's saying, I don't fail you. Or it can also be interpreted as I won't fail you. It kind of means the same thing in this context. A lot of times, Spanish speakers, they'll use the present tense to talk about something that they're describing something in the future tense. Like if I say, tengo que trabajar mañana, I'm saying, I will have to work tomorrow. But I'm really saying, I have to work tomorrow. I'm using the present tense to describe something that's going to happen in the future. Or in this case, he's saying, no te fallo. So he's describing something that's not going to happen in the future. I'm not going to fail you. Now that verb fallar, be very careful with it, because if you accidentally mispronounce it, you could end up saying something that's really, really vulgar, which is this word right here. Do not confuse that A for an O. That word right there, it means something completely different. I don't even know if I should really say it on camera, but it's basically a really vulgar word that means to have relations with. So it's very similar to another word that we have in English that starts with an F, if you're catching my drift. So definitely be careful about your pronunciation in Spanish. When we're pronouncing our vowels, like I said in my pronunciation video, the vowels are the star of the show in Spanish, and you got to make sure that you're pronouncing them right, or you can absolutely say a completely different word with a totally different meaning. And in this context, when you're trying to use the word fallar, you could accidentally say something that you really do not want to say. So, okay, let's go ahead and move on.
Tonto que es un reprimido, eso no te
so now we've gotten to the chorus of the song, and the first line is Oye Mi Amor, no me digas que no. So the first line in that is oye, which comes from the verb oír, which means to hear. Now, there's another word in Spanish which is really similar to the verb oír, and that's escuchar. Now, generally speaking, and this is going to depend on regional differences as well, but generally speaking, the main difference between these two verbs is that oír has more to do with the actual act of perceiving sounds inside of our ears to hear something, and escuchar generally has more to do with the act of listening for something or paying attention to a certain sound. As a matter of fact, the verb oír, when it's in its past participle used with the perfect aspect to say like I've heard or you will have heard or whatever, is oído. And oído is the same word for ear. Now, there's another word in Spanish for ear, which is oreja. Now, the difference between the two is that oreja is the part of the ear that's on the outside of your head that really is just for catching the sounds. And the oído is the part inside of your ear where you actually hear the sounds at. So when you're talking about oído, that's going to be the inside part of the ear, and oreja is the outside part of the ear. Now, the verb oír in this context is being used to say oye, which is being used as an affirmative command to tú, which he's using it basically to say listen or hear me, essentially. Now, oye is a word in Spanish that is very useful for getting somebody's attention. When you use that word, when you just say it at the start of a sentence, you shout it out to somebody or whatever, say oye, you're basically saying hey. It's like how we say hey in English. It's a way of getting somebody's attention. In Spanish, you're going to say oye if you're talking to a single person in an informal context, but we are going to have to conjugate it differently if we're talking to somebody in a formal context or if we're talking to a group of people. So, for example, if I'm at work and one of my customers is about to walk out the door without his driver's license that he accidentally left on the counter, as he's leaving, I could shout out to him. I could say, oiga, which I'm actually telling him, listen. I'm saying hear, like hear me, but it's being used to say hey, just to get his attention real quick. So I could say, oiga, usted dejó su licencia. So you left your license. So when you use that verb oír in the affirmative command form, like to say oye or oiga or oigan or whatever, you're basically just using it to get people's attention, to say, hey, like you're just want to make sure that they're listening to whatever it is that you're going to say next. Okay, so I'm going to be really quick here, but this phrase where he says nada a medias, he's saying nothing halfway. So a medias is just a phrase that means halfway. Now that comes from the word medio. Medio means half. There's another word in Spanish which also means half, which is mitad. Now there is a difference between the two in that medio can be used to describe a half of something, as in like a half of like a cake, a piece of something, a half of it, like you take something, cut it down the middle, you have a half. And you can also use that with mitad. So if I take a cookie and I cut it in half and I'm holding up a half in my hand, I can say, tengo una mitad de la galleta, which means I have a half of the cookie. But in another context, medio can only be used to describe half of a certain quantity of something. So for example, when I'm at work renting something to my customers, if it has a half-day rental rate, I can ask them, ¿Quieres la máquina por un día o medio día? So I'm asking them, do you want the machine for a day or half a day? Now, I can't really use mitad in this case because it's like half of a quantity of something. It's half of an amount. In this case, medio is really the only option that makes sense. So mitad is used only to talk about half of something, as far as like a piece of something when you split it in half. Whereas medio can be used for that, but it's also being used to talk about half of a quantity of something. Okay, let's move on. next part I want to talk about here is where he says, un tipo frío y aburrido. So they're saying a cold and boring guy. So you guys might already know the word tipo to mean type. When you go to a restaurant or store or whatever and you say, ¿Qué tipo de whatever ofrecen? You're saying, what type of whatever do you guys offer? But that word tipo, it also just means guy. It's talking about just like a dude, like a guy, like a person. So that's one thing that you don't want to get confused about. If you see it being used to describe a person, they're just saying a guy. It's just a really casual way of saying a guy. And in this case, he's saying frío y aburrido. Now, like I talked about in my ser versus estar video, when we use ser to describe somebody with certain adjectives in place of using estar, we're basically saying that that's a characteristic that applies to that person all the time. So aburrido is actually one of those adjectives I talked about in that video. So when I say estoy aburrido, I'm saying I'm bored. But if you say él es aburrido, or in this case, he's not using the verb ser, but it's implied here. You could say un tipo que es frío y aburrido. He's saying this guy is cold and boring. So just keep that in mind, that these adjectives, when they're used with ser, or not even necessarily with ser, but when they're just used to describe a person, they're talking about what that person's like in general, what their personality is like. So he's saying this is a cold and boring guy. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is that word tonto. Now, tonto is a really fun one. It basically just means like silly or foolish or just a fool. So you can use it as a noun to say that somebody is un tonto or una tonta, or you can say no seas tonto, which means don't be silly. Now, don't get this confused with the word tanto. Like I was talking about earlier, vowels are the star of the show in Spanish, and we got to make sure that we're pronouncing our vowel sounds properly, or we could screw up and say a different word that has a completely different meaning. So when you're saying this word, make sure you're using that o sound at the beginning. If you say tonto, you're saying that he's a lot, basically, or he's so much, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in this context. So we're saying un tonto que es un reprimido. So he's a fool who's a repressed person. Okay, let's move on. Now, the next part of the chorus I want to talk about is where he says, y vamos juntando las almas, y vamos juntando los cuerpos. So he's using the verb ir in the affirmative command form for nosotros. And like I talked about in my command video, that verb ir is used a little bit differently in the command form, where it does not take on that subjunctive form for nosotros. It's just using that same indicative conjugation. So when we're saying something like, let's go to the beach, we're saying vamos a la playa. So just keep that in mind. But the other thing here is that verb juntar. Now, juntar is a verb basically meaning like join together, or to put together, or to collect together. It's about like basically bringing things together. So you might know the word junto, which means together. Like estamos juntos en este momento means we are together in this moment or right now. So when we use the verb juntar, we're talking about bringing things together. So he's saying, let's bring our souls together. Let's join our bodies together is what they're saying in the song. So I could say something like junté el rompecabezas, which is I put the puzzle together. Rompecabezas means puzzle. I love that word, by the way, because it basically means it breaks heads. That's how you say that something is a puzzle in Spanish, is that it breaks heads. I'm gonna have Profe Austin do a video sometime on words like rompecabezas or rascacielos or parabrisas or abrelatas, where they are one word, but it uses a verb and a noun put together to create one word to say things like can opener, skyscraper, or whatever have you. Okay, amigos, well, that's all the time I've got for us today. Muchísimas gracias por ver. I hope that you've enjoyed, and if so, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys again real soon. Hasta pronto. Ciao.